Pull up a chair, friends, because I have a story that's equal parts dream vacation and nightmare planning. Let me set the scene. I'm Ethan, a 29-year-old guy who's always valued family, even though mine can be a bit challenging. I've got two younger siblings, Caleb, 26, and Mia, 24. Caleb and I get along just fine. He's laid back, pragmatic, and the kind of guy you can grab a beer with and vent about life. Mia, though, is a different story. She's my baby sister, and while I love her, her sense of entitlement has tested everyone's patience over the years. It wasn't always easy growing up with her. As the youngest, she often had our parents wrapped around her finger. When Caleb and I had to earn things the hard way, Mia somehow managed to skate by on charm and melodrama. Don't get me wrong, we've had good times together, but there's always this undercurrent of conflict. Caleb, bless him, avoids clashing with her unless absolutely necessary. But when they do argue, it's fireworks. Earlier this year, I was fortunate enough to land a solid bonus at work. With my parents' anniversary on the horizon, I thought it would be the perfect opportunity to bring the family together for something special. A dream vacation to Hawaii felt like just the ticket. It wasn't just about treating them. It was about creating lasting memories and giving my parents a chance to revisit the place they honeymooned decades ago. The idea of helping them relive that magic made me feel genuinely excited. When I shared the news, my parents were ecstatic. Caleb was pumped too, and I even saw Mia's eyes light up with excitement. For a moment, everything felt perfect, but as you can probably guess, things didn't stay perfect for long. Mia's initial joy quickly morphed into something else entirely, control mode. She wasn't content with being a guest on the trip. She wanted to plan the whole thing. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not a control freak. I wouldn't have minded delegating a task or two if Mia had asked nicely. But this wasn't a request. It was a demand. She insisted I hand over all the planning to her because, according to her, I wasn't good at organizing trips. I stood my ground and told her no. It wasn't just about pride. It was about practicality. I knew Mia's taste. She had a habit of maxing out other people's budgets with extravagant choices, whether it was a luxury spa day or 5-star dinners every night. My budget, while generous, wasn't bottomless. My parents, ever the mediators, suggested that Mia could help with planning the activities. It seemed like a fair compromise, so I agreed to give her a peek at the itinerary. She immediately started nitpicking and suggested changes to make everyone more comfortable. To my frustration, her suggestions were reasonable enough to warrant some tweaks, so I adjusted the schedule. She took this as an opportunity to gloat, claiming her attention to detail was why she should have been in charge all along. Against my better judgment, I decided to throw her a bone. I gave her access to my planning account, but made it crystal clear that she was only allowed to rearrange the schedule slightly and only with my approval. For a moment, it felt like we had reached a truce. She even suggested fun additions, like matching outfits for family photos, which I thought was harmless and cute. But I should have known Mia wouldn't stick to the rules. With just a week to go, I checked the account to ensure everything was in order. What I found left me seething. Mia had canceled some of the activities I'd booked, ones I'd carefully chosen to create special moments for our parents, and replaced them with her preferences. Not only that, but she had announced to the family group chat that she was now the official planner for the trip and expected everyone to follow her lead. I called her immediately, demanding an explanation. She brushed me off, claiming she'd made executive decisions because her way was better. When I told her to back off, she accused me of being controlling. That night, my parents called me, confused and concerned after hearing Mia's side of the story. She had painted me as the bad guy, and they urged me to let her stay involved for the sake of family harmony. I explained my side, careful not to spoil the surprise activities, but they still thought I was overreacting. At that moment, I felt utterly unappreciated. I considered canceling the whole trip but decided against it. Instead, I resolved to let Mia do her thing. If she wanted control so badly, she could have it. I figured I'd just go along for the ride and try to enjoy myself, even if it wasn't the vacation I envisioned. Little did I know, things were about to get even worse. As the days ticked down to our departure, I did my best to stay out of Mia's way. She was clearly thrilled with her new role as trip planner, and honestly, I didn't have the energy to fight her anymore. I figured fine, let her have her moment. My parents and Caleb seemed cautiously optimistic, hoping this would smooth things over between us. I kept reminding myself that the goal was to make our parents happy. If letting Mia take the reins helped us get there, so be it. For a brief moment, it felt like the tension was easing. Mia even shared updates in the family group chat, trying to act like she had everything under control. I wasn't thrilled with all the changes she'd made, but I decided to focus on the positives. My parents still didn't know about the surprises I'd planned, a private luau and a snorkeling adventure, and I hoped those moments would salvage the trip. Caleb, ever the diplomat, assured me we'd still have a great time. "Just let Mia play tour guide," he said. "We'll have fun no matter what." But then, 2 days before we were supposed to leave, I got a notification that stopped me in my tracks. An email from the airline popped up, confirming that my ticket had been canceled. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe the airline system had glitched. I called customer service to sort it out, only to hear the words that made my blood boil. "The cancellation was initiated from your account." I immediately knew who was behind it. Furious, I called Mia. She answered on the second ring, her voice annoyingly cheerful. Before she could say anything, I cut straight to the chase. "Did you cancel my ticket?" She let out a laugh, the kind that instantly told me she didn't think she'd done anything wrong. "Oh yeah, I did," she said casually. "Look, Ethan, it's for the best. You're too controlling and your bad vibes would ruin the trip for everyone. We talked about it, and the family agrees. It's better if you stay home." For a second, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I paid for this trip. I planned this trip. And now, somehow, I was the one being cut out of it? The sheer audacity of it left me speechless. When I finally found my voice, I demanded, "Who is we? Who agreed to this?" Mia sighed as if I were the one being unreasonable. "Mom and Dad, obviously. Caleb, too. Everyone thinks you need to let go and stop trying to control everything." I knew Caleb well enough to call her bluff, but before I could say anything, she hung up. I was seething. My hands shook as I stared at my phone, trying to process what had just happened. I didn't deserve this. Not after everything I'd done to make this trip special. There was no way I was letting Mia get away with this. Fueled by a mix of anger and determination, I logged back into my travel account. The first thing I did was cancel her ticket. If I wasn't welcome on the trip I paid for, then neither was she. I rebooked my ticket and immediately changed the account password so she couldn't pull any more stunts. Then I sent a blunt message to the family group chat. "Since Mia decided I'm not welcome on the trip I paid for, I've canceled her ticket. If anyone else feels like staying behind with her, let me know, and I'll cancel your ticket too." The fallout was immediate. Caleb called me first, completely baffled. "What the hell happened?" he asked. When I explained, he was furious. Not at me, but at Mia. "I never agreed to dump you," he said. "She made that up. There's no way Mom and Dad would have gone along with this either." It was a relief to hear that Caleb had my back, but the fight was far from over. My parents called next, and they were livid. They couldn't believe I'd canceled Mia's ticket. They accused me of being petty and vindictive, but I stood firm. "She canceled my ticket first," I pointed out. "I'm not going to reward her for sabotaging the trip I worked hard to plan. If you want to take her side, fine, but I'm not letting her hijack this." My dad tried to play peacemaker, saying the family should stick together no matter what, but I wasn't budging. "She can come if she apologizes," I said. "Otherwise, she stays home. End of story." Mia, predictably, didn't take this well. She flooded my phone with angry texts, calling me every name under the sun. I forwarded them all to my parents, hoping they'd finally see her true colors. Dad, bless him, tried to mediate one last time. He called me and asked if I'd be willing to rebook her ticket if she apologized. Knowing Mia, I doubted that would happen, but I agreed to give her the chance. Dad looped her into a conference call and urged her to make amends. It went about as well as you'd expect. "Apologize to Ethan?" she snapped. "For what? Canceling his ticket? I did the right thing, and I'm not saying sorry to that control freak." Dad hung up in frustration, leaving me on the line. "Do you see what I'm dealing with now?" I asked him. He didn't have much to say after that. I knew I'd made the right call. but the whole situation left a sour taste in my mouth. This was supposed to be a joyful trip for our family, and now it was marred by drama and bitterness. Still, I wasn't going to let Mia ruin it for the rest of us. The day of the trip arrived, and I was determined to make the best of it. Caleb and I met our parents at the airport, and the tension was palpable. My mom and dad looked disappointed, probably still hoping Mia would show up last minute. Caleb, on the other hand, was excited and doing his best to keep the mood light. He gave me a nudge and said, "This is going to be great. Don't let her drama ruin it for you." I smiled, grateful for his support, but the air was heavy. My parents, especially my mom, had always been soft on Mia, and her absence was clearly weighing on them. I reminded myself that this trip was about celebrating them, and I was going to do everything in my power to make it special. As we boarded the plane, I noticed my dad giving me a sideways glance. I braced myself for what was coming. Sure enough, he leaned over and said in a low voice, "You know, this whole thing with Mia, it didn't have to get so out of hand." I kept my response calm. "Dad, she canceled my ticket. She tried to cut me out of my own trip. I can't just let that slide." He sighed but didn't push further. I could tell he was torn. On one hand, he didn't approve of Mia's actions. On the other hand, she was his daughter, and he couldn't help but feel protective. I didn't blame him for feeling conflicted. It's not easy to watch your kids at odds with each other. Once the plane took off, I forced myself to focus on the positives. This was still Hawaii. This was still a trip I had worked hard to plan. And this was still a chance to make incredible memories with the people who showed up. I had a surprise private luau waiting for us, a snorkeling adventure planned, and even a helicopter tour booked. I wasn't going to let Mia's absence ruin what could still be an amazing experience. When we landed in Honolulu, the mood started to shift. The warm breeze, the scent of the ocean, and the vibrant colors of the island seemed to melt some of the tension away. Caleb was already in vacation mode, taking goofy selfies with palm trees in the background. Even my parents started to relax as we checked into our hotel and settled into the first day of the trip. The private luau that evening was a hit. Watching my parents laugh, dance, and share nostalgic stories about their honeymoon made it all worth it. For the first time in days, I felt like things were finally going right. Caleb and I even managed to sneak in a few jokes about Mia without making it too obvious. It was our way of letting off steam. The rest of the week followed suit. We went snorkeling in crystal clear waters, explored hidden beaches, and indulged in some of the best food I've ever had. The helicopter tour was a highlight. Seeing the island from above was breathtaking, and my parents couldn't stop marveling at the views. Caleb, who's usually not one for sappy moments, even admitted, "This is probably the coolest thing I've ever done." But even as we created these amazing memories, Mia wasn't far from our minds. My mom occasionally checked her phone, and I knew she was texting Mia to make sure she was okay. The updates weren't exactly reassuring. According to my mom, Mia was still furious and sending messages filled with guilt-tripping and accusations. She blamed me for ruining her chance to experience Hawaii and even accused my parents of abandoning her. One night, as we were winding down after dinner, my dad finally brought it up. "You know," he said, "Mia's not handling this well. She's upset. Maybe we could have found a way to include her." I felt my jaw tighten but kept my tone steady. "Dad, I tried. I gave her a chance to apologize. She refused. She made her choices. I can't keep bending over backward to accommodate her." He didn't argue, but I could see the sadness in his eyes. It wasn't easy for him to accept that his youngest child was acting this way. My mom chimed in, "I just hope she realizes how much she's hurt everyone. This wasn't what we wanted, Ethan." I nodded, feeling the weight of their disappointment. It wasn't what I wanted either, but I had to draw the line somewhere. She needs to learn that her actions have consequences. By the end of the week, the mood had lightened significantly. We had shared some incredible experiences, and the beauty of Hawaii worked its magic on all of us. My parents even admitted that, despite the rocky start, they had truly enjoyed themselves. Caleb, ever the optimist, declared the trip a success. "See," he said, grinning, "who needs Mia when we've got this view?" We returned home with a mix of relief and lingering sadness. While the trip had been amazing, it was hard to ignore the fact that Mia's absence had cast a shadow over the experience. My parents were grateful for everything I had done, but I could tell they were still struggling with the fallout. For me, the trip had been a wake-up call. It reaffirmed the importance of standing up for myself and setting boundaries, even when it's hard. I couldn't control Mia's behavior, but I could control how I responded to it. And while I hoped things would eventually get better between us, I knew it would take time, and a lot of growth on her part. For that to happen, coming back from Hawaii felt bittersweet. The trip had been everything I'd hoped for in terms of experiences, but the rift between me and Mia loomed large. Caleb and I returned to our routines, but my parents struggled to adjust. They were still visibly upset about how everything had unfolded, and Mia wasn't making it easier for them. For the first week after we returned, things were quiet. Too quiet. I assumed Mia needed some time to cool off, but that theory quickly fell apart when my mom called me late one evening. She sounded exhausted, her voice heavy with frustration. "Mia's been stopping by the house almost every day," she said. "She's not here to apologize, though. She's just sulking. She stays through dinner, barely talks to us, and then storms off like we've wronged her." "Has she said anything about the trip?" I asked. Mom sighed. "Oh, she's said plenty. She keeps telling us we betrayed her by going without her, and that she'll never forgive you for ruining everything." I rolled my eyes so hard I thought they might stick. "Mom, you know that's not what happened. She canceled my ticket. She made this bed. She just doesn't want to lie in it." "I know, Ethan," Mom said softly. "But you're her brother, and we're her parents. We're just trying to figure out how to fix this." I didn't have the heart to tell her that there might not be a quick fix. Mia had dug herself into a hole so deep that only she could climb out of it. And from what I'd seen, she wasn't ready to try over the next few weeks. The situation with Mia escalated. She wasn't content to just sulk at my parents' house. She started venting to anyone who would listen, spinning the story to make herself the victim. According to Mia, I had deliberately excluded her from the trip to punish her, and my parents had gone along with it because they were afraid of upsetting me. The narrative was laughably untrue, but she told it with such conviction that a few extended family members started reaching out to me, asking for my side of the story. I kept my responses short and factual. Mia canceled my ticket. I rebooked it and canceled hers in return. She refused to apologize, so she stayed home. That's the truth. Most people accepted my explanation, but the damage Mia had done to the family dynamic was undeniable. One afternoon, Caleb called me with an update that made me laugh out loud. "You're not going to believe this," he said. "Mia asked me to co-sponsor another trip so the family could do Hawaii without you." "What?" I said, barely able to contain my disbelief. "Yeah," Caleb replied, clearly amused. "She pitched it like it was this great idea for family bonding. But here's the kicker. She wanted me to pay for the whole thing up front. She said she'd pay me back later." I couldn't help but laugh. "Did she really think you'd go for that?" "Oh, I shut it down immediately," Caleb said. "I told her I wasn't trading a free trip to Hawaii for a paid trip to Mexico, where I'd basically be her personal photographer. She called me a selfish jerk and hung up." It felt good to know Caleb wasn't falling for Mia's antics, but the situation still weighed on me. No matter how ridiculous her behavior was, she was still my sister. Part of me hoped she'd come to her senses, but as the weeks turned into months, it became clear that Mia wasn't interested in reconciliation. 3 months after the trip, my mom called with news that surprised me. "We've asked Mia to move out," she said. "Wait, seriously?" I asked, not sure if I'd heard her right. "What happened?" "She's been missing work and hasn't been paying rent like we agreed," Mom explained. "Your dad finally had enough. He found her a small apartment, paid the first 2 months' rent, and told her it was time to take responsibility for her life." I was shocked but impressed. My parents had always been lenient with Mia, so this was a major shift. "How did she take it?" "Not well," Mom admitted. "She cried, begged, and even tried to guilt-trip us. But your dad stood firm. He told her she had to grow up and that we couldn't keep enabling her." I felt a mix of emotions hearing this. On one hand, I was proud of my parents for finally setting boundaries. On the other hand, I knew this wasn't going to be the end of Mia's drama. Sure enough, a week later, Mom called me again with an update. "Mia's been coming over unannounced," she said. "She shows up at dinner time, eats with us, and then stays the night." "She's freeloading again," I said flatly. Yes, Mom said, her voice tinged with frustration. Your dad confronted her about it, and she admitted she's been avoiding her landlord because she hasn't paid rent. I let out a long sigh. Mom, you can't let her keep doing this. She's never going to change if you keep bailing her out. I know, Mom said quietly. Your dad told her the same thing. He even said that if she shows up again asking for help, we're not answering the door. It was a harsh stance, but I understood where my dad was coming from. Mia had pushed them to their breaking point, and they were finally standing their ground. Whether she would learn from this or double down on her behavior remained to be seen. A's for me. I tried to keep my distance from the drama. I had done what I needed to do, set boundaries, stand up for myself, and refuse to let Mia walk all over me. I didn't regret my decisions, but I couldn't help but wish things had turned out differently. Maybe one day, Mia would realize the damage she'd caused and make an effort to repair our relationship. Until then, all I could do was focus on the family members who valued and respected me. A few months passed and life began to settle into a new normal. My parents stopped giving me daily updates about Mia, though I could tell she still loomed in their thoughts. Caleb and I stayed close, often laughing about the absurdity of the situation while trying not to dwell on the tension Mia had left in her wake. One day, Caleb called with what felt like a breakthrough. Mia finally reached out to me, he said. She asked if we could talk. Really? I asked, genuinely surprised. What did she want? Well, Caleb began, she wanted to clear the air. But it turned into another one of her guilt trips. She said you've been trying to turn everyone against her, and that you're the reason she's struggling. I sighed. It was disappointing but not surprising. Did you call her out? Of course, Caleb said. I told her she's the one who burned bridges, not you, and I reminded her that none of this would have happened if she hadn't canceled your ticket in the first place. How'd she take that? I asked. She hung up, Caleb said with a chuckle. But honestly, man, I think she's starting to realize she can't keep blaming everyone else for her problems. I hoped Caleb was right, but I wasn't holding my breath. Mia had a long history of avoiding accountability, and it wasn't going to change overnight. Meanwhile, my parents had quietly drawn a line with Mia. They still cared for her deeply, but they weren't allowing her to freeload or manipulate them anymore. Mom mentioned that Mia had tried to move back in after defaulting on her rent, but Dad had refused. It's tough, love, Mom said, but it's what she needs. I admired their resolve. For years they'd struggled to enforce boundaries with Mia, and it was clear that their patience had finally run out. It wasn't easy for them, but I could see that they were starting to regain a sense of peace in their home. As for me, I threw myself back into work and focused on the positive aspects of my life. The Hawaii trip, despite the drama leading up to it, had been a bright spot. I cherished the memories we'd made. My parents laughing at the luau, Caleb's childlike awe during the helicopter tour, and the simple joy of being together in such a beautiful place. It reminded me of why I'd planned the trip in the first place. But there was still a part of me that felt unsettled. Mia was my sister, and no matter how strained our relationship had become, I couldn't ignore the hope that one day we might find common ground again. I wasn't naive enough to think it would happen overnight, or that it would happen at all, but the thought lingered in the back of my mind. About 6 months after the trip, I got an unexpected text from Mia. It was short and to the point. Hey, can we talk? I stared at the message for a while, debating how to respond. Part of me wanted to ignore it to avoid reopening old wounds, but another part of me, the part that still cared, knew I couldn't turn her away. When we finally spoke, Mia's tone was different. She wasn't defensive or accusatory. Instead, she sounded tired. I know I messed up, she said. I shouldn't have canceled your ticket and I shouldn't have tried to take over the trip. I don't know. I guess I was jealous. The honesty caught me off guard. Jealous of what? I asked. Of you, she admitted. You've always had things figured out, your job, your life, everything. I've been stuck in this rut and it felt like you were showing off. I know that's not fair, but that's how it felt at the time. Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. I'd spent so much time being angry at Mia that I hadn't stopped to consider what might be driving her behavior. It didn't excuse what she'd done, but it gave me a new perspective. I appreciate you saying that, I said. But you have to understand, I wasn't trying to compete with you. I just wanted to do something nice for the family. I know, she said quietly. I was wrong. I've been wrong about a lot of things. I'm trying to figure stuff out, but it's hard. We talked for a while longer, and for the first time in years, it felt like we were really listening to each other. Mia wasn't perfect, none of us were, but this felt like a step in the right direction. In the weeks that followed, things didn't magically go back to normal, but there was progress. Mia started taking small steps to get her life together. She found a new job, started paying her rent on time, and even began mending her relationship with our parents. Caleb and I were cautiously optimistic, watching from the sidelines as she worked to rebuild the trust she'd lost. Looking back, the Hawaii trip had been a turning point, not just for me, but for our entire family. It forced us to confront long-standing issues, set boundaries, and have difficult conversations. It wasn't the dream vacation I'd envisioned, but in a way it brought us closer to something even more important. Understanding. Mia and I still have our differences, and I'm sure we'll butt heads again in the future. But for now, I'm holding on to the hope that we're moving in the right direction. Sometimes that's all you can ask for. Story 2. Is it my fault that I no longer want to visit my dad's house? Because he consistently chooses the side of his girlfriend and her daughter over mine? I'm 15 years old, and since my parents split custody of me, I alternate between my dad's and mom's homes. I go from place to house, and it's kind of random. My dad began dating Emma about a year ago, and she has a daughter called Sarah who is around 12 or 13. Sarah and Emma began spending a lot of time at my dad's house. They appear to be at his place all the time, even though they have their own apartment. Sarah was in my bed when I woke up in the middle of the night the first time they spent the night while I was there. Sarah ended up in my bed for some reason, even though Emma packed this cot bed thing for her to sleep on. I forced her out of my bed since I didn't like that. However, my dad and Emma became angry with me after that. I already have a bed, therefore I should share it, they added, accusing me of being cruel. The living room at my dad's house also has this very comfortable chair that I received as a present. My dad says that even if I get to it first, I should give it to Sarah since they are guests, even though I like that chair and it is meant to accompany me when I move out. Here, quote, "S the thing. Then, when I visit my dad, I frequently find myself sitting on the floor. Why? The reason behind this is because my dad enjoys relaxing in his customized recliner. Emma, on the other hand, sprawls out on the couch as if it were her bed. I normally just spend my time in my room as a result. I mean, I don't really like sitting on the floor, do I? Who would? I have the impression of being a pet, and that's not my life. My father. He makes an effort to invite me to join them for a seat. I'm called into the living room by him. But really, what's the point of my sitting on the floor? It doesn't sound enjoyable at all. Although I don't see it that way, he believes I'm simply being a normal, challenging adolescent. I mean, prior to visiting his residence, I was out with my mother. Before she left me off at my dad's, we even had some fun together. And guess what? I got the really wonderful blanket from my mom. My favorite sports team is featured on it. I was ecstatic about it. I mean, I was eager to cuddle with it. Getting thrilled about a blanket seems a little ridiculous, doesn't it? But I thought it was fantastic. I wanted to use it at my dad's place, so I carried it over there. Here's the worst part, though. My father forced me to tell Sarah about it. It wasn't fair, he continued, that I get anything new when Sarah didn't. I feel compelled to share all I get. Whenever something interesting happens to me, it's always the same. My dad constantly tells Sarah that she has it when she gets her hands on something fantastic, so she makes the final decision. Furthermore, Sarah is under no obligation to share if she chooses not to. No inquiries were made, such like this. Sarah was once reading one of my books. It was a favorite of mine. All of a sudden, Emma and my father got into a heated disagreement. Emma was quite distressed. At that moment, she wanted to go. After witnessing all the turmoil, Sarah made the decision to bring my book along. I didn't want her to take my book, so I said, "No way." My dad was furious with me. "Just let her take the book," he said. My dad and Emma reconciled in the end, and I was given my book back. However, I couldn't stop wondering, what if they hadn't reconciled? I would have permanently lost one of my favorite novels. Let's talk about ice fishing now. Since I was 7 years old, my dad and I have had a unique bond. Just the two of us spending time together while ice fishing. However, he chooses to include Emma and Sarah this time. And you know what? They complained the entire time. Our father and I were intended to spend that time together, but it wasn't the same with them present. Particularly with all the complaining Emma, Sarah, and my dad after all that mess. Yes, you do recall how I felt alienated in my own father's home. I made the decision to stop. I had really had enough of being treated more like a visitor than his daughter in such circumstances. But right when you believe you've seen everything, you are forced to reconsider everything when life throws you a curveball. My grandpa's father contacted me a few weeks after I made the decision to stop going to see my dad. Grandpa, you know, has always been this quiet guy who doesn't get engaged in drama or pick sides. However, he stated that he wanted to speak this time, me and him alone, no parental involvement. I was first apprehensive, but my curiosity won out and I consented. This small restaurant is where we met. The greatest milkshakes in town are his favorite. Sitting there with him, knowing that we were going to get into some serious business, felt strange. Grandpa, however, just began discussing life, family, and how adults occasionally make errors while attempting to do what they believe is right in his calm manner. Although he didn't justify my dad's actions, he did help me see that it's possible that he was having trouble integrating his new family with his old me. The actual kicker? Prior to our meeting, Grandpa had spoken with my dad. My dad was truly sorry for the way things had turned out, he told me. He had been preoccupied with attempting to please Emma and Sarah. He was pushing me away without realizing it. Despite his desire to put things right, my dad was unsure of where to begin. Grandpa made a really straightforward yet ideal suggestion. I nearly laughed. Just as before Emma and Sarah entered the scene, it was a father-daughter camping excursion. I'll admit that I wasn't convinced, but as I gave it more thinking, it seemed more logical. This might be our opportunity to make things better, or at least get started. I decided to take a chance and agree. The camping expedition comes next. At first it was horribly slow and unpleasant. However, while we relaxed around the campfire, went fishing, and put up the tent, something changed. We had a conversation, really discussing every topic, how we might proceed, how we felt, and how I felt. Although it wasn't a quick repair, it was a beginning. However, this is where the drama resurfaces midway through our journey. Who arrives without warning? Sarah and Emma. As it happens, my dad had not been completely honest with them about why we were traveling. Emma decided it would be a good idea for them to join in and surprise us. A surprise? You may say that I was taken aback. Okay, more like furious. This could have been the point at when everything collapsed once more. However, an unforeseen event occurred. My father defended our time together. He told Emma that the purpose of this vacation was to mend our friendship. It's past time for something. And to my complete surprise, Emma got it. She told me she was sorry. I never imagined seeing this. They then departed, making room for us. The remainder of the journey was a haze of feelings, discussions, and unexpected healing. Things weren't flawless when we returned, but they had improved. In order to ensure that our father-daughter time was respected, my dad began establishing limits with Emma and Sarah. I also felt like I didn't have to fight for my dad's attention for the first time in a long time. The situation with Emma and Sarah is still being worked out. Even if there are still awkward and tense moments, an attempt is being made, which is more than I could have imagined. Is it my fault because I didn't want to visit my dad's earlier? I don't believe so. But I've discovered that sometimes progress requires taking a step back. Perhaps, just perhaps, there is a possibility for us to be a family instead of simply a father and daughter leading different lives. The next tale. Am I the jerk for putting my mom in a catch-22 situation and informing my stepsister that we are not friends? Here's the scoop then. Last year, my mom made the wise decision to relocate her new fiancé into our home. I'm not really a huge admirer of his, to be completely honest. My mom became quite unhappy when I suggested that I might want to move in with my true dad, who lives abroad. She cried and made a great show of it. So she negotiated for me. If I stayed, she said, my soon-to-be stepfather would not have the authority to control me in any way. I only needed to be courteous to him. I thought that was fair enough. Now this guy has 2 daughters, June, who is a little younger, and May, who is 17 years old, my age. 15. June and I are getting along just well. Although she doesn't really annoy me, May is a bit of a struggle because she is in the same grade as me. Imagine working on a project with someone who is really uncomfortable, doesn't receive the highest marks, and gets unhappy about almost anything that is assigned to you. She also doesn't appear to have any pals of her own, for whatever reason. Therefore, May began clinging to me like she was in dire need of a buddy as soon as our parents became serious and discussed getting married. I mean, I'm hanging to her like she's a leech and I can't get rid of her. To be honest, it's been somewhat aggravating. I therefore found it rather easy to avoid May at school until my soon-to-be stepfamily arrived into our home. You see, our lessons are different. Compared to me, she is easy. She continued to send me messages and friend requests on social media in an attempt to become my buddy in spite of this. However, I chose to ignore them because I wasn't very interested. It was easy enough when she wasn't always in my face. However, once her family moved in with us, May was all over the place. They followed me about the home, tried to strike up a conversation with me, and generally tried to join in on whatever I was doing. She seemed to be too much, constantly there, chatting non-stop, and I was unable to find any quiet time. I quote, am a huge sports fan, right? And I have to train a lot as part of it, almost every day. For me, it's a huge problem. However, May isn't exactly what you would describe as athletic. However, our parents felt it would be a terrific idea for her to accompany me to the gym when she told them she was interested in getting in shape. Although I wasn't overjoyed, I reasoned that it couldn't be that horrible. It turns out really poorly. She was constantly inquiring about how everything worked, and she became exhausted pretty quickly. It seemed like we had only completed 25% of my exercise regimen when she was finished. It was draining, not only for her, but also for myself, making an effort to answer all of her inquiries and check on her well-being. Then I reached my breaking point over the weekend. After training, I brought a friend over to play video games and chill out. Just relax for a while. Without even asking whether it was cool, May suddenly invites herself into my room. For me, that was the final straw. I had to tell her up front that I hadn't invited her to join us, and that it was rather impolite of her to just show up like that. Everyone needs their own place, after all. And she didn't seem to be understanding it at all. She was unable to spend time with us after I informed her. She became really agitated and began to weep. She then proceeded to complain to her father, who happens to be my stepfather. He essentially told us to let her play with us when he entered my room. No way, I said, and reminded him that he had an agreement with me that he shouldn't boss me around my mother. He was furious about this. Following that, we were all required to attend a large family gathering. I told my stepdad the truth and refused to back down when he accused me of bullying him. That May persistently tries to push herself into settings when she is obviously unwanted. I told him the truth. It would be best if she just stayed out of my way for the little time I have left at home before I move out, I remarked, adding that she is not and never will be my friend. My mom was under a lot of stress from this whole affair. She dislikes confrontation. However, after that, my stepfather began threatening to end their relationship if she didn't correct me. I told my mother at that point, right up, I'm going to leave if she takes his side and attempts to punish me for this. As long as he's around, I'll just go and never return. May has been acting very distraught and sobbing to everybody who would listen, making a big issue out of the situation. In the meanwhile, her own sister June became frustrated and urged her to stop. Their mother defends May by claiming that she is just a lonely and sensitive child. But to be honest, I fail to understand how that has suddenly become my concern. I have my own life and I can't be held accountable for someone else's happiness, especially when they're causing me a lot of hardship. The next tale. Asking my in-laws to decide between me and a daughter they never had, am I the jerk? Here's the thing then. My spouse and I have been wed for 9 years. I'm a little younger than him, who is 38. However, there has been a persistent drama with a woman named Sally ever since we started dating. My husband and Sally used to be quite close, similar to best pals. Close. However, once my husband and I began dating, things became strange. When we started dating, Sally wasn't happy about it. She began sending me nasty texts, accusing me of stealing from her and claiming that our relationship was poisonous. It made me feel very unwanted and quite uncomfortable. We were married for a few years when Sally had a difficult period. She instantly went to my spouse for help after divorcing him. I made an effort to be empathetic, but we later discovered that she had been lying about many of the reasons she said led to her divorce. I had to face her when we returned to the region, and she told me the truth. I told her up front that I didn't like being misled. Sally didn't stop there, though. She began circulating false information about me, claiming that I was siding with her ex-husband because I was in love with him. For me, that was simply too much. She seemed to be attempting to harm my reputation with everyone. This is when things become complicated. I felt compelled to ask my in-laws to make a difficult decision since they are involved. They either back me, the wife of their son, or they back Sally, who has caused a lot of problems and isn't even related. I don't want to be the evil person in this circumstance. Therefore, it's been really stressful. All I want is for my life to be free of the drama that Sally always injects into it. I felt I wanted some calm after a lot of stress with Sally, who used to be quite close to my husband. I told my husband's mother, who is essentially my mother-in-law, that I no longer wanted to be involved with Sally. Things were very peaceful for a year or so, and it was good that I didn't have to deal with Sally at all. However, my mother-in-law then began pressuring me to get past the Sally incident. Even though Sally would be attending, she urged me to return to family gatherings. I was attempting to act calmly. "Okay, I'll deal with these problems, but I won't be hanging around with Sally," I replied. "I will be present, but I will not speak to her." Sally somehow got out that I would be back as soon as I consented to it. She began messaging my husband to express how much she missed their previous friendship and other things. We felt as though we had to start over. Then, without warning, I received this really hurtful email from a stranger. It made some quite offensive remarks. We conducted some investigative work after I initially assumed it was simply a random internet harasser. We discovered that the email originated from the same neighborhood where Sally resides. It also highlighted stuff that only someone who knew me well would be aware of. I even used my first and middle name, as well as information from my private Facebook group. To be honest, Sally was the only person who sprang to me who would do anything like that, and it was really eerie. I so concluded that I needed to have a serious conversation with my husband's parents once more. I had a conversation with my father-in-law and mother-in-law about the entire email problem. I informed them that I wished to permanently disassociate myself from Sally. It was a difficult choice, but I needed them to see that I couldn't live with someone who was so cruel and negative, especially if they would even write me terrible letters. I had to be firm and let my in-laws know that I was serious about not wanting to speak to Sally at all. Thus, the entire Sally scenario became really emotional. I decided I didn't want Sally in my life, not even by coincidence, after receiving that hurtful email. I had a lengthy conversation with my in-laws, my husband's parents. We essentially had to explain everything to them at one time. We advised them to select the people they wished to have at family gatherings. Either Sally or I had to be there, but neither of us could. Although it was a difficult situation, things couldn't continue as they were. However, my mother-in-law was adamant about things returning to their pre-drama state. She said that she hoped Sally and my husband might rekindle their friendship. That, she believed, would make everything miraculously better. Despite the fact that I was very uncomfortable being with Sally, my mother-in-law simply didn't want to believe it, despite my repeated attempts to convey to her all the horrible things Sally had done and said to me. She insisted that she couldn't picture Sally doing anything wrong, and that she was like a daughter to her. My father-in-law, on the other hand, was unwilling to discuss it at all. He would simply leave the room if we attempted to discuss what was happening. Anything negative about Sally was not something he wanted to hear, regardless. Thus, I found myself feeling completely trapped and questioning whether I was the one acting irrationally. I felt like I had to choose between protecting myself from someone who was obviously causing issue and not upsetting my husband's family. When I stood up for myself, I couldn't help but wonder if I was the one generating all the issues. It was a lot to handle, the final tale, Am I the jerk for supporting my grandmother's choice to name me as the primary beneficiary in her life insurance will? I'm 30 years old, and even when my aunts and cousins lived with my grandmother, I still had a unique connection to her. We had a unique time together, she and I. My own mother's daughter wasn't really there for me when I needed her, which is how our bond began. But when I got older, I found that my grandma and I shared a lot of similarities. When I made the decision to become legally independent at the age of 16, my grandmother was there to support and encourage me every step of the way. I made careful to assist my grandmother in whatever manner I could when I was able to support myself. She needs the additional assistance since she has vision problems, which prevents her from driving, especially after my grandfather died away. I thus took care of her needs, such as taking her grocery shopping, cleaning the yard, and thoroughly cleaning her home. Despite our large family, none of my other relatives, not even her own children or my cousins, volunteered to assist her in the same way that I did. My granny was in a major accident not long ago. We nearly lost her because it got so terrible that she needed surgery. Fortunately, she is now at home and recovering, although she needs far more assistance than she did previously. She therefore concluded that it was time to amend her will. Her original will said that I, my sister, and my 4 cousins would receive half of her assets and money, while the other half would go to her 3 children. However, my grandmother changed significantly as a result of everything that had transpired. She made the decision to give me and my children around 80% of her possessions, with the remaining 20% going to the rest of the family. Following her decision to amend her will, my grandmother left me and my children around 80% of her assets, with the remaining portion to be divided among the other family members. My relatives were really irate. We had just begun to mend our connection, but now my mom is so angry that she won't even speak to me. My aunt is also furious. She claims I deceived my grandmother, who is too old and frail to make her own judgments, in a daily phone contact. My aunt went so far as to report me to Adult Protective Services on the grounds that I was stealing from my grandmother. However, I maintain that when my grandmother altered her will, she did so with full knowledge. It was all up to her. There's more to the tale now. My biological father was required to pay child support, and I recently received some money from a settlement. My mom should have received this money, but my family believes I stole it in some way. They're making use of the circumstance. In addition, my grandma's will claims that I'm only trying to obtain money for my family. Here, "S the problem though. Since my mother wasn't providing for me, I got the child support immediately. Before I made the decision to become legally independent at the age of 16, I was neglected and placed in foster care. The only person who truly stuck up for me during all of this was my grandmother. When I was younger, she wanted to take me in, but her own health problems prevented her from doing so. Does taking what my grandmother wants to offer me make me the evil person in this situation, especially in light of all that we have experienced together? Story 3. I paid my expenses at home, but my mother moved her friend and children into my room. She is now pleading with me to return after I left. Hello everyone. Remember to click the subscribe button if you like these stories and would like to help the channel. It enables me to provide you with even more fantastic material like this. Let's begin the video now. The OP begins by stating that although staying at home at the age of 23 wasn't precisely what she had in mind for her life, it mostly worked out. I wasn't doing anything like freeloading. I paid the rent, the energy bill, and even the phone plan for my mother. I wasn't simply lounging around playing video games and eating food. To be honest, it was a good bargain. I was able to concentrate on my freelancing business without having to worry about large bills, had my own place, and received home-cooked meals. For my content production projects, which I hoped would gain popularity soon, I had even converted my room into a makeshift studio. Before Kelly, my mom's best friend, moved in with her 2 children, everything was good. I understood the scenario, but I wasn't excited about it. My mom said that Kelly's husband was a total jerk and that she was going through a difficult divorce. Our house was the finest choice for them when they sought a place to stay. I assumed that it would only last a few weeks until Kelly recovered. It wasn't a huge problem when they initially stayed in the guest room. The children were a bit noisy to be sure, but I just shut my door and plugged in my headphones. I could get by, but it wasn't ideal. Although the guest room was small, Kelly and her children could spend some time there. I didn't really think about it because I assumed that was the arrangement. That quickly changed. After performing some errands one day, I immediately noticed something strange when I got home. I could hear children giggling inside my open door. I was astounded by what I saw when I first entered. There were toys all across my bed. One of the children was using my computer, and my desk chair had been relocated. As if it didn't matter, my studio setup included my pricey camera, lights, and microphone pushed to the corner of the room. My belongings were all over the house, and Kelly's children were running about as if they owned the home. "What the hell is going on?" I cried. I was in shock and probably spoke louder than I should have. As soon as my mother entered, she began berating me as if I were the one who had stepped out of line. "Calm down your tits," she said. "It's not really important. You had the largest room and the kids needed extra room. It's just my chamber, the one for whom I was paying rent." She dismissed me as though I were being absurd when I informed her that I wanted them out of my room right away. "They must be at ease," she replied. "You're being self-centered. Selfish?" What I was hearing was unbelievable. Comfort wasn't the objective here. Respect was at issue. I did more than simply sleep in my room. I worked there. I had spent more than $3,000 setting up my studio. Furthermore, I couldn't ignore it or put it in a corner. My mom didn't like it when I told her all of this. "They're only children," she remarked. "They also want to use your computer to play. Quit fussing too much." I instantly put an end to that thought. They are not coming in contact with my equipment. "I'm screwed if anything happens to it," I remarked. Kelly then added her voice. "Oh, come on," she said. "They are only inquisitive and you cannot hold them responsible. They may listen to you if you weren't so stiff." I was taken aback. Stiff? I wasn't stiff. I was attempting to safeguard my belongings, something I put a lot of effort on. I made it clear to her that the children were not permitted to handle my belongings and that I would hold her accountable if they did. That was not warmly received. She also referred to me as selfish, and my mother concurred. Suddenly, I felt like the villain in my own house. Things in the home were tense after the initial explosion. Considering that I was the one making the rent payments, I was shocked that my mother and Kelly were against me. However, I assumed that after they cooled down, they would see how absurd this was. I made another attempt to speak with my mother the next day. I talked about how important my studio equipment was to me on a professional and economical level. For me, freelancing is a profession, not simply a pastime. I couldn't do my job without my equipment, and it would take me months or maybe years to scrape up the money to replace everything. "I'm not trying to be rude, but this is unfair," I informed her. "You simply handed it away without asking me, and I'm paying the rent for that place." What did she say? "You're exaggerating. I make the decisions about what takes place in my home." I was taken aback. "Your home? Rent is something I pay. I'm not simply sitting here for free. I'm contributing." As if it didn't matter, she shrugged. "The children require room. Your sister's room is overflowing with her belongings while your brother's room is too little. Additionally, people like your place because it contains all that upscale things. What I was hearing was unbelievable. Both of my 15-year-old siblings had absolutely good rooms. Although my brother's room was smaller, it was still spacious enough to accommodate 2 children. Since she was often out with her friends, my sister hardly utilized her room, which was nearly as large as mine. My mother, however, wouldn't even entertain the idea. She said that because your room is cooler, the kids adore it. They enjoy it more because of all your sophisticated devices. Have fun? Fun wasn't the point here. My room wasn't a playground where Kelly's children could play. I lived there, worked there, and unwinded there. I asked her whether she would replace anything if they broke it. As I am unable to pay for it. Kelly then added another comment. "Stop being so paranoid, please. They're not monsters. They're children. They would most likely leave your belongings alone if you just let them play." I gave up and allowed them to use my $3,000 setup. "Are you serious?" "No." "You're being selfish," replied Kelly, rolling her eyes. "We're going through a difficult moment, and you're making it all about yourself." I was at my breaking point at that moment. "I need to move my stuff out if they're staying in my room," I remarked to my mother. "I cannot let them ruin it." She chuckled. In fact, I chuckled and said, "Where will you put it? I'm just meant to let them throw away my belongings since there isn't any room elsewhere." I raised my voice and asked, "How fair is that?" My mother just gave a head shake. "It's not fair in life. You've grown up. You ought to be able to put up with some inconvenience, a little annoyance." Getting evicted from my own room wasn't a minor annoyance. It was impolite. I couldn't even utilize the space for which I was paying rent. In addition, I was no longer permitted to enter my room. My mother remarked that for the next several days, I had no right to haggle because it was now their territory. I made every effort to avoid being in the house. It wasn't the same without my studio setup, so I would try to work on my laptop while hanging out at coffee shops. My output plummeted. I was under extreme stress and was falling behind on deadlines. I made one final attempt to talk sense into my mother's head. "Look, I'll work something out. They may remain in my room while I relocate my setup into the guest room. In this manner, they may have the space they require while I continue to work. She didn't give it much thought. "The guest room is too small to accommodate all of your belongings. You'll simply have to wait for Kelly to recover." "How much time will that take?" Frustrated, I asked. She gave a shrug. "For as long it takes. Setting deadlines for other people's hardships is not your place." It was unbelievable to me that this was taking place. I didn't really despise Kelly or her children. I was willing to assist them because I knew they were going through a difficult moment. This wasn't helping, though. It was facilitating. I was essentially being forced to leave my own life in order to make room for Kelly, who was not paying anything to remain with us. I heard Kelly and my mother conversing in the kitchen later that evening. She was upset that I had called her immature and selfish. "He doesn't even realize how difficult this is for us," she added. "He's simply acting like a brat. According to my mother, he has always been obstinate. He'll move on." That was the last straw. They didn't seem to care about me or my predicament, I realized. My parents just saw me as a source of income, and Kelly and her children saw me as a barrier. They have no intention of listening to you or changing. I began searching for rental accommodations the next day. The choice wasn't simple. Despite the odd turmoil, I really like living at home. I got along with my siblings and it was reasonably priced, but I couldn't continue living somewhere where I wasn't treated with respect. I finally had enough of feeling alienated in my own house. After a few days, the room was no longer the only concern. Respect was at issue. I was making contributions to bills, paying rent, and attempting to establish a future for myself. However, neither Kelly nor my mother appeared to care about any of that. I was fed up with their decision to put my needs last. I sat my mother down in the living room one evening. Kelly was putting her children to bed while my brothers were upstairs. The two of us were alone. I reasoned that she would finally pay attention if I could show her how serious I was. "Mom." I began speaking in a calm tone. "We must speak." She looked at me wearily. "Now what? I can't continue to live this way." "I can't even use that room even though I've been paying rent for it," I remarked. "It's unfair that you gave it away without asking me." Leaning back on the couch, she let out a sigh. "This is nothing new to us. It's only transitory. Kelly is going through a difficult period with the children. You can adjust since you're young." I shot back, "That's not the point. Adapting is not the answer. Respect is at issue." I wasn't asked. "You just decided that I no longer owned my room. All of my belongings are now crammed into a corner or packed away, making it impossible for me to work at all." She waved me away and said, "You're being dramatic. Since this is my home, I have the final say over what takes place there." Once more, that line. It felt like a slap in the face each time she said it. "I asked if this was your home. So why do I have to pay rent? Maybe I shouldn't pay anything at all if you're going to treat me like a guest." She squinted. "You dare not pull that. You are aware that I need your assistance with the expenses. Then give me the respect I deserve." I lost my temper. "You cannot take my money each month and then claim that I have no say in the matter. This isn't how it operates." She gave me a crazy eyes expression. "You want me to do what? Put Kelly on the streets with her children? There is nowhere else for them to go." I gave a head shake. "No, but alternatives do exist. They could either move into one of my siblings' rooms or remain in the guest room. You could even switch rooms if you like. As a result, everyone shares the area alternately. Not to mention stealing my room and keeping me out. That's not acceptable." She folded her arms. "The guest room is too tiny for 3 people, and your sister and brother are too young to share a room. The greatest choice was your room." "No," I answered, "that was the simplest choice. You threw it on me because you didn't want to handle the bother." I could feel my fury erupting at that moment. "I'll simplify this," I remarked, giving her a direct look. "Either I leave the house or Kelly and the kids leave my room. You have those choices." Unexpectedly, she blinked. "Avoid being absurd. Even so, where would you go? I've already begun my search for rental space." I informed her that I would find another place to live if she didn't respect me, or the fact that I paid to live here. She laughed. "You're playing a bluff. Moving out is out of your price range." I crossed my arms and leaned back. "Give me a try, Dot." The days that followed were stressful. The ultimatum lingered in the air like a thundercloud, but I didn't mention it again. My mother's lack of interest in me just strengthened my resolve. In my free time, I messaged landlords, looked through apartment postings, and calculated my spending limit. I knew I could make it work if I reduced non-essentials, but it wasn't going to be simple. At home, however, things were worse than before. I was unable to stop Kelly's children from using my room as their own playground. I couldn't even enter the building without someone becoming upset. Kelly yelled at me when I attempted to get some books and headphones that I had left behind. "How come you're in here?" Standing in the doorway with her fists on her hips, she made a demand. "I must have my belongings," I said, attempting to seem calm. She gave a head shake. "You can't just walk in at any time. Now this is their room." I was dumbfounded when I looked at her. "Do you mean me? My room is this one." "Not anymore," she answered in a cold tone. "You have to give them room. Be mindful of their personal space." I almost laughed out loud at the irony. With clenched teeth, I responded, "I'm paying rent for this room. I'll get my belongings and head off. However, because no one respects my space, don't tell me to respect theirs." She left after muttering something beneath her breath. However, the harm had already been done. That's when I understood this couldn't be fixed. Kelly wasn't going to change, and my mother wasn't going to support me. I would have to act on my own initiative if I wanted things to improve. I was able to find a place for rent that I could afford a week after the ultimatum. It wasn't really elaborate. It was my space, a tiny one in an ancient structure. The apartment was sufficiently clean, and the landlord was amiable. Above all, I could arrange my studio without having to worry about children tampering with my tools. I didn't immediately inform my mother. Before I broke the shocking, I wanted to make sure everything was settled. I had an odd mixture of relief and melancholy as I signed the lease. I had no intention of moving out, yet I could no longer stay. Even if it meant leaving the house where I had grown up, I had to prioritize myself. Moving my belongings out came next. With my mother and Kelly breathing down my neck, I knew it would not be easy. I no longer cared, though. I had had enough of being kind. I knew I had to move quickly once I signed the lease for my new residence. My mom would find a way to make the relocation even more difficult if I gave her too much notice. I thus meticulously planned everything out. 2 of my close friends volunteered to help me pack and relocate my belongings after I informed them what was happening. One even offered to use their phone to record everything, in case things became nasty. I had a final conversation with my mother the night before the relocation. I wanted to give her one last opportunity to turn things around. "Mom," I began speaking in a calm tone, "I'm moving out tomorrow after finding a home to rent." Startled, she raised her head from her phone. "This is what you're actually doing?" "Yes," I nodded and replied. "I didn't have much of a choice." She gave an eye roll. "You're going overboard. The entire situation is transient. You're not leaving anything behind. It's not insignificant." I spoke aggressively. "You told me I had no say in the matter, gave away my room and locked me out. You treated me like I was disposable, even though I pay rent." She let out a sigh, as if I were wearing her out. "You are aware that in order to maintain this house, I must have your rent. How will I be able to pay the bills if you go?" Even though I felt guilty, I ignored it. "That is no longer an issue for me." "You clearly stated that this is not my home," I said. "It's your house," you said. "Your regulations." "I don't have to stay here, though, if that's the case." She gave me a scowl. "You're simply going to abandon us then?" I gave a shrug. "You can request that Kelly begin making rent payments, or her husband, as they remain wed. I know nothing about you." After that, she remained silent, only glared at me before returning to her phone. I took it as my indication to go. The next day, my pals arrived up bright and early with a couple of cars and a hired van. We were ready to get everything done as fast as possible. I'd already put most of my belongings into boxes, but I still had to move my studio equipment out of my former room. When we went to the house, Kelly and her kids were already up. Kelly was enjoying a cup of coffee at the kitchen table as the children ran around the living room. As soon as I went in, she looked at me suspiciously. "What's happening?" Her eyes narrowed as she asked. "I'm leaving," I said plainly. She raised her eyebrows. "Really? This is the reason you're leaving? That is pitiful." Disregarding her, I went to my room upstairs. Or the room I formerly occupied. As soon as I opened the door, I nearly passed out at the sight. My desk was overflowing with odd trash, and my bed was covered with toys and cuddly animals. My camera, microphone, and computer were crammed into a corner and appeared to have been abandoned for weeks. I started filming and turned to one of my pals. As I began to gently put away my equipment, he took out his phone and started shooting. Kelly walked upstairs and began shouting, so she must have recognized what was going on. "You can't just show up and start stealing," she yelled. "Now this is their room." Trying not to panic, I turned to face her. "Kelly, it's my stuff. I'm taking it with me and I paid for it." She folded her arms. "You're acting absurdly. You're having a fit because a couple of your children need space." I stated calmly, "This isn't a tantrum. Here, I'm advocating for myself. I've been treated like I don't matter by you and my mother, and I finished it." She began to shout once again, but I ignored her and continued packing. While one of my pals continued recording, the others assisted me in packing everything into the vehicle, in case my mother or Kelly attempted to pull something. My mother had come upstairs to check on us by the time we were done. She went crazy when she noticed the room was empty. "This is what you're actually doing?" Her voice trembled with rage as she asked. "Just because you didn't receive what you wanted, you're leaving us?" I gave her a direct glance. "You didn't respect me, therefore I'm going. You handed this place away without asking, even though I paid the rent. I'm prioritizing myself since you made it apparent that I'm not a priority here." I raised a hand as she opened her lips to argue. T. "I've already decided." Kelly stood at the doorway, her arms crossed, staring at me as I carried the final box out to the vehicle. "Good luck out there," she remarked mockingly. "When things are tough, you'll see how self-centered you've been." I didn't even think to answer. I simply got into the van and headed out with my pals. My phone exploded with texts from my mother that evening after I had moved into my new apartment and begun unpacking. She was upset, accusing me of being careless and self-centered for abandoning her in a difficult situation. She claimed that I had abandoned the family and left her to handle the financial burden alone. "You've been so self-centered all along." I read one text. "After everything I've done for you, I can't believe you're still doing this to me." I made a reply, then erased it. I had no obligation to explain myself to her. I was making my own decisions now that she had chosen hers. The first emotion I had after relocating to my new home was relief. No more insults, no more fights. Above all, I want to stop feeling like I don't matter. My new room was peaceful and mine, even if it was smaller and the building wasn't the best. For the first time in weeks, I properly arranged my studio equipment in the corner of my room after unpacking it. I had the feeling that I could breathe. However, the tranquility was short-lived. The following morning, my mom started flooding my phone with messages, sending me one after the other. When she asked if I had paid the rent for the month, I informed her that I hadn't since I had moved out. She snapped. "The 25th hasn't even arrived yet. She sent an SMS. For the remainder of this month you owe me." I gave an eye roll. I said, "No, I don't. I'm not paying rent because I'm no longer residing there. Ask Kelly to take care of it." She responded very immediately. "Kelly lacks the funds necessary to cover her rent. You are aware of that. I can't afford to manage everything by myself, and you're abandoning me to do so. I have no problem with it." I responded to the SMS. "It's your house, your rules, you said clearly. Now it's your duty and your bills." That response didn't sit well with her. She began accusing me of being ungrateful, immature, and selfish. She said that by leaving I was destroying the family. Initially, the guilt began to seep in. I had always contributed monetarily, and I was aware that my efforts had had a significant impact. Then, though, I recalled why I had first left. I had been treated like a throwaway object by my mother. So why should I feel guilty about prioritizing myself? Anger replaced the guilt trips the next week. I was wrecking everything according to my mom's lengthy, meandering texts. I read one text: "I am ashamed of you. The whole family is wondering why you departed. Furthermore, I'm not sure what to say to them." I didn't even try to respond. I was aware that my words would only make the situation worse. I concentrated on getting adjusted to my new environment. I got my studio back up and running, caught up on work, and began to feel like myself again. Without all the bustle and negativity pulling me down, I felt so much better. My sister unexpectedly contacted me a few days later. I assumed she wanted to check in because I hadn't heard from her much since I moved out. But I knew she had a different plan as soon as I picked up the phone. "Mom is quite unhappy." Ignoring the small conversation, she said, "She claims that you haven't paid your rent for this month, and now she's worried about the expenses." I said in a calm voice, "I'm not living there anymore." "I don't live there, so why should I pay rent?" My sister said, "But you know, she can't afford it without you. You have always been helpful. Why halt now?" I told her straight out since she didn't respect me. She treated me as if I were unimportant, took away my room, and shut me out. I'm tired of being exploited. My sister let out a sigh. "It isn't that easy. Mom is only attempting to assist Kelly, who is going through a lot." "I understand," I answered. "However, why does assisting Kelly entail betraying me? That room's rent was being paid by me. I was quite entitled to retain it." With weakness, my sister remarked, "She didn't mean to screw you over. She's simply under stress." "I am too," I fired back. But while I was being ejected from my own room, nobody gave a damn. After that, she didn't say much. After a few more minutes of conversation, primarily regarding her schoolwork, we hung up. Even though I could see she was in the center, I refused to allow her shame me into altering my decision. My mother began to send me less texts as the days passed. She must have recognized that I would not back down. Her final antics, however, made me glad I had departed. A relative I hadn't spoken to in years texted me one morning when I got up. "Hey, I heard about the drama with your mom," it stated. "Are you all right?" Bewildered, I inquired as to what they were discussing. At that point, they forwarded me a screen grab of a Facebook post that my mother had created. She portrayed me as the bad guy in it, saying that I had left her and the family when they were in need. Naturally, she omitted the section when she revealed my room, and created the impression that I had departed out of retaliation. I was enraged. Arguing with me in person was one thing, but sharing our private problems publicly was excessive. However, I didn't reply to the post. I reasoned that the effort was not worth it. If it was necessary for her to play the victim, then let her. Both I and the individuals who truly mattered were aware of the reality. After a month, I've completely adapted to my new home. I've resumed my work. I'm at last beginning to feel like myself again, and my stress levels have significantly decreased. I do get texts from my mom from time to time, but I limit the conversation to neutral subjects and make it brief. I'm no longer allowing her to guilt trip me since I've learned to set limits. Does leaving make me feel bad? Yes, occasionally. I don't regret my choice, even though it's terrible that things had to finish this way. If my mother wasn't able to give me the respect I deserved, I had to look elsewhere. The finest thing I could have done for myself was to move out. I'm also not turning around. Is it my fault that I left and didn't pay the remaining rent for the month? Not in my opinion. My parents made it plain that Kelly and her children were more important than me, despite my best efforts to be reasonable. Ultimately, I needed to prioritize myself. I don't care if that makes me selfish.